Hey, welcome back to the eDrum Workshop. I'm Luke and I hope you're having a great day. You might have already heard by now that Yamaha have made somewhat of an eDrum comeback with their new DTX6 line of electronic drums. Unfortunately, I'll be the first to admit that I was one of those people that thought that maybe Yamaha were out of the game. So it's really nice to see them come back, but for me it's a little bit bittersweet. There's three versions of these new kits available, the DTX6K-X, the K2-X and the K3-X, and they're all aimed somewhere around the mid-range price point, from $999 through to $1,800, though the prices in the UK seem to vary quite wildly. I'm not really sure what's going on with those prices at the minute. I've seen the KX model going for anywhere between £999 and £1,130, and that doesn't seem all that competitive compared to the US prices. And at first glance, they're pretty underwhelming kits, especially as you go up the price brackets. They're coming with an 8-inch 3-zone silicon snare pad, then depending on the kit setup, you've got 7-inch single-zone rubber tom pads all round, or the 7-inch single-zone silicon tom pads on the K3-X setup. The KX has small cymbals with a foot controller hi-hat, and the K2 and K3-X increase the cymbal sizes and give you a hi-hat on a stand. The stand being included in the package is a nice touch, as that's something that you don't usually see on electronic kits. The hi-hat and crash cymbals on the KX version of the kit appear to only be single-zone from what I've read in the manual, which is disappointing. On the other versions, I believe that all the cymbals are 3 zones, though the manual doesn't make mention of using the bell zone on the hi-hat, so I might be wrong on that one. I don't really like that they're using rubber pads on the KX and the K2X versions of these kits. I think that's a real shame. Overall, the eDrum market is moving well away from these, so seeing Yamaha return with them at this price point is disappointing, especially on the K2X, which is around the $1,500 mark. It's kind of crazy to me that they think that that's fine. I can see a lot of people being put off by this. Although I have heard great things about the silicon pads, I've not really had much chance to try them myself. They're still going to be divisive in a world full of mesh heads. And the sizes once you get up to the K3X are pretty tragic. $1,800 is a big asking price for such small pads, even if you do love the materials being used. Single zone toms all around all prices is a shame too. When you couple those with an uninspiring rack setup, it makes me wonder what the average person's impression of the kits will be. On the face of it, these kits look a little bit overpriced and underwhelming, and I'll talk about that a little bit more later on. However, if you do dig past the face of it, what I'm far more interested in myself are the new module, the DTX-PRO module, and something that the manual makes mention of for future Yamaha pads. So the module is way more interesting than most offerings in this price range. Straight up, I think this module outclasses the Roland 07 module, which is at the same price point as the lowest variation of this kit, and also the TD17, which is a direct competitor to the middle and higher tiers. Just looking at the design of it, it's clear that it looks a bit more professional and has robust features. It has all separate trigger inputs, no cable snake here, which I always welcome, though unfortunately they've removed the MIDI in socket, which is a shame, as the MIDI flexibility was always a strong point on Yamaha modules. On the flip side, Roland have got away with that for years, so I'm not really that surprised. The sounds, though far from perfect, are more instantly impressive sounding than anything that Roland offers around this price range. They sound like punchy, well-rounded and well-recorded samples, and they've even been recorded with proper room microphone samples that can be dialed in. Now, I'd need to hear some more in-depth examples of these sounds or try one out myself to be sure, but there does appear to be somewhat of a mild machine gunning present on some of the promo videos, and there is a bit of a quality to it that's somewhat reminiscent of those mid-2000s module sounds. However, Simon Edgoose has posted some audio examples up on his SoundCloud, and they're a lot more promising. So it's looking like with some careful setup and mixing that there's a lot of potential for the sounds here, especially in context with music. He also posted an example of a multi-layered sampled instrument that he imported, more on that shortly. There's also some great functionality that appears to have been carried over from the EAD10 with the ambience, compression and effects knobs. This is great to see on a module like this, both in terms of general sound shaping and also just ease of use. Single dial approaches to these things are really handy for those who aren't as well versed in creating sounds from scratch. There's also some practice functions and a recorder on the face of the module too, which are handy to have, and the recorder lets you save to either the internal memory or a USB drive. Where things get much more interesting are some of the other functions that Yamaha have included in their modules for years, like layering multiple voices on a single pad. You can layer up to 4 instruments per pad zone, which is a great amount of flexibility. There's also the ability to load in your own samples, and as Simon's examples demonstrated, you can have up to 10 velocity layers with 4 round robins per layer in a sampled instrument. This is plenty of variation to have in a sampled instrument to make it much more playable, and this is a feature that I'm a big fan fan of. The downside to this is that the sample memory appears to be a bit limited, it's around 64 meg by the looks of things. But on the flip side, the TD17 only has about 32 megabyte for one-shot import, so you know, this is better than that. There's a transient modifier on the sounds too, which is another feature that Roland have been implementing, so that's nice to see here. And there's a global mixer for adjusting levels across all kits, which is a super handy function that ideally I'd like to see in every drum module. There's also instrument-specific and master EQ and compression settings, and a headphone-specific EQ from the looks of things, which are all great features that you don't see from the bulk of the competition. The module lets you split zones for extra pads without the need for a specialised splitter cable, and you can even do that on the kick input, which is also nice. And you can hook up to the Yamaha Wreck and Share app with the module too, which is something that the EAD10 kicked off, and that's a great function that lets you easily record videos from your kit directly to your phone. And then we come to the positional sensing, and by far one of the most interesting points for me, a new Yamaha pad. Positional sensing was previously a Roland only thing, apart from the odd outlier with different methods that I don't really know a lot about, and this was due to Roland having a patent on the method that they used. That patent is recently expired as far as I'm aware, so we might see this coming to a fair few other modules in the near future. From what I've heard, the Gava G9 also has positional sensing, and the positional sensing available on these Yamaha kits with the stock setup is just on the ride cymbal, and that's a bit of a weird feature for a 13-inch ride cymbal, as there's not a great deal of playable surface, so you wouldn't think it would make that much of a discernible difference. And I suppose you could upgrade to the 15-inch Yamaha ride, which I assume will also work with this function and probably be a little bit more useful for it, but either way I suppose it's nice to see this feature in there. Positional sensing is also going to be available on the snare drum, but not with the pad that's provided. It's going to be available with the new Yamaha XP125SD snare pad. Now this hasn't been unveiled yet, and I've not seen it in any form other than the manual illustrations for the time being, so I'm just going off what's in the DTX-PRO manual. But it appears that this is a multi-sensor mesh pad, or at least that's how I'm interpreting it and how most of the other people I've seen discussing it are too. Looking at this particular illustration, it appears to have 3 dots on the head in a triangle formation, which makes me think that they've gone with the 3 piezo setup like ATV and the newer Roland VAD pads. Now this is potentially really interesting if it's true, because the main downside of the 3-cone pads on Roland modules is that you lose the positional sensing that you can normally only get from center cone pads. Have Yamaha cracked this on a 3-cone setup? And if so, will these pads be wired similarly to other brands, making them compatible with other modules, though likely without positional sensing? And will other manufacturer pads with this setup be compatible with the Yamaha module and its positional sensing? It's too early to tell at the minute, but it definitely intrigues me. The fact that Yamaha are seemingly coming out with a mesh pad at all is interesting in its own right, because this isn't something that we've seen them show any sign of doing before. So what this leads me to believe is that there might be a new flagship on the horizon, and maybe it'll be made up entirely of these pads. And of course this is only speculation for the time being, but it would be pretty weird if they only came out with a new mid-tier range and nothing else, and this is what I'd be properly interested in. To be honest, I want to see Yamaha come out with a new flagship that somewhat changes the game, and I think this is what I find most disappointing about the DTX6 lineup at the moment. It would have been great to see Yamaha returning to eDrums with all guns blazing, a full range of kits across the whole price spectrum that actually shows us something that we've not truly seen by them yet and can get people more excited. The direction that electronic drums are heading is pretty clear at the moment. People want larger pad sizes, people want more acoustic-like playability, but they also want things that you can't get from your acoustic drums like quick recording and onboard effects. Now you can agree or disagree with this direction for electronic drums as an instrument, but that's pretty much the current trajectory. Coming out with a mix of safe bet components and the tiny rubber pads that people are trying to get away from is a really strange signal to be sending to the market. It makes it feel like Yamaha still don't take this particular sector of the market that seriously, and even if the module is the greatest thing in the world, the overall package and aesthetics for somebody coming in new to electronic drums, or somebody who's looking for an inspiring practice kit, doesn't really look that appealing on the surface. And I'd love to say that the looks of the kit shouldn't matter and that it should all be about what you get out of it, but it's another reality of the market for a lot of people. They care what the kit looks like, they care how big those pads are, and if people see full mesh kits everywhere else and decide that that's the kind of head material that they want to play on, this kit is very unlikely to sway them away from that. The smartest move that Roland made with the new 07KV kit is to finally do away with the rubber pads at every price point, and it feels like this move from Yamaha is a little bit toe tone deaf to the industry's shift over the last decade or so. They could have got away with these pad sizes if it was all mesh. Yes, Roland have tiny pads on their kits at these prices, but people seem more open to the idea of it with the mesh PDX6 pads. It's a harder sell with rubber pads at these sizes in my opinion. I want to see Yamaha doing well and for the competition in eDrums to be healthier, so I'm hoping that I'm wrong about this part, but for now I'm left feeling that this is a bit of a missed opportunity, despite the module itself being really promising for this price point. So this is a really mixed bag, but for me the standout is the new module and the possibilities for these new pads. What do you think of these new Yamaha kits? Is the module enough to sway you? Do you like rubber pads, or do you think that going into 2021 without mesh heads is a mistake? Let me know down in the comments. If you liked this video, be sure to leave a like on it and subscribe if you haven't already. Check out my store over at the eDrumworkshop.com for new kits and samples for your electronic drum module. Check out any of the other videos up on the screen, and above all, enjoy the rest of your day. I'll see you in the next video. Cheers!